All right. Moving on to cinematography. So the one big word for this cinematography is innovative. This is very interesting, very forward-thinking cinematography in this movie. They do plenty of different things in unique ways. Kurosawa was very creative. He actually got to start as a painter, so he's a very visual person, and he had a very big opinion about how his frame worked and what he wanted to see things, how he wanted to see things framed. So you can learn a lot about composition and storytelling by watching his films and the way he kind of sets up his shots and where he places his actors. So it was the first film to ever shoot any shots looking directly up at the sun. So again, that might sound kind of weird. You're like, okay, what's so big about that? But back then, there really wasn't a way to kind of expose or photograph looking up at the sky directly at the sun. It wasn't going to work. And he found a way by kind of shooting through the clouds and through the trees and stuff to kind of make it so you could kind of expose things as you're having the sun. Plus film was developing, getting better, and cameras and lenses were getting better. And so he was the first one to successfully use this as a storytelling device in a narrative film. Compositionally, he does great things with framing and shapes. If you look at the two bottom compositions, those are an example of framing, which we'll talk about, but we're going to move on to shape. First, let's do that. So one of the big shapes that we see when we look at composition and where we place actors and stuff in our frame is the use of the triangle, okay? So our brain can kind of put the pieces together of a triangle, and one of the things that we kind of register with the triangle is when you see a triangle like this that's on the screen, when the base is on the bottom, it's a very stable structure, so a very stable scene, a very safe scenario, right? But when you see a triangle upside down on its point, that's a very kind of teetering on the edge kind of shape in that position. And so it actually creates this kind of tension in the scene because we know it could all kind of fall apart at any second. And doing this in your compositions helps create this kind of subliminal tension in the shots. So if you look at our two shots down below here, the ones on the right-hand side, if you look, I'm going to create the triangles. So this is a composition from the movie, and you could see how he sets up the triangle, and he's setting up an upside down triangle because he wants tension in his compositions because the story is a very contentious story in itself. And here's another example of it. Now, these are just two that I pulled. There are tons of examples of this. If you go watch the film, maybe you can find these. And then finding these shapes, the triangle especially when you're watching other shows, and if you find the upside down one, they're probably doing it in a very tense, dramatic sequence, right? And then again, if you go to the other two on the left-hand side, the concept is called frame within a frame or limited space. Frame within a frame is part of limited space as a concept. And basically what you're doing is you're kind of taking the frame and then you're actually boxing your actors into even a tighter space, which again is very tension filled. You're kind of locking them in or boxing them in or kind of trapping them, so to speak. And that is kind of a theme of this film. And so if you look at those two frames over there, we're kind of looking at them trapped in a space, or their space that they can occupy is confined by set pieces and the wall and stuff like that. So it's something that they do a lot in this film. Definitely check it out and look for it as you're watching along. The other thing that's super cool that they do in this movie is the camera movement. Now, again, in 1950, we are moving the camera, but it isn't easy to move the camera. Moving the camera smoothly is very difficult because the equipment is big, the equipment is heavy, and they're actually doing these really intriguing kind of artistic dolly shots and tracking shots in the forest, like in the woods, right? Now, I don't know if they were on a set or not. It appears that they're on location. So it's very like impressive that they were able to move the camera like this out there in the wild there in the forest, right? So we're going to take a look at, so this first shot we're going to look at a shot where we're tracking along with these folks in the forest, and we're looking through trees, and it creates this very like dramatic, tense effect because we're like looking through and we can't quite make out what's going on. So that's the first shot I wanted to show you. And then there's these 2 or 3 like dolly shots. Can't remember if there's 2 or 3 of them, but I'm going to show them to you right now. We're going to look at these shots where we get this very interesting tracking shot where we're on our female protagonist, and we track to change the perspective of how we're seeing these 2 people together in the frame. And then you're going to see a matching tracking shot or dolly shot, and it's somebody else's version of the story, and it's going to be done a little bit different. And then again, there's a third one as well. So check those out. We looked at some intriguing kind of really well done camera movement. We looked at shape. We talked about the sun. But the big thing here is in his cinematography, he gives you a key to learning who is actually telling the truth. So this is going to be like a little cheat code I'm going to give you here. When you watch the film, again, one of the ideas is you can't tell who's telling the truth. And there's a great video on this about the Rashomon effect in the deep dive page. So I suggest you watch that video so you kind of get a fuller understanding, because it has a lot to do with sometimes even people think they're telling the truth, but they've misconstrued what they think they saw, or their implicit bias like alters what they think is the truth. So sometimes people are like honest liars. They think they're telling you what is accurate, but they're not, right? So that plays a role in this film as well. But Kurosawa uses this cinematography to help give keys and clues as to when we're hearing the truth and when we're not. So I'm going to give you this little bit of a cheat code and see if it helps you kind of decipher the movie. So here it is right here, okay? When we see the sky, when we're in the court, so this is the court setting that you're looking at right here. When we can see the sky, any bit of it, that's when the character who's speaking is speaking the truth. And when we don't see the sky, that's when we're seeing untruth. And again, the reason why I didn't put lie is because there's that whole idea of implicit bias. Sometimes they just remember the events incorrectly because of the trauma of the sequence or the scene or the event or whatever. And they're just kind of personal bias. They, in this time, we were talking about 19th century Japan, women weren't regarded very highly, right? Like the men were like the thinkers, and the women were kind of meek and subdued and had to be servant to the man and things like that. So there's a lot of implicit bias that goes into the opinion of women when you're talking about this particular story. So I put it as untruth and truth. So anytime when you're in the court and you can see the sky above anybody's head, we are hearing the truth. And when we don't see the sky, we're listening to something that's untrue. So the sky and the sun in the film is representative of the truth. The dagger in the film is representative of deception. So pay attention to the dagger and kind of see how it gets used and see if that can help you figure out who's telling the truth and what actually happened. And then there are 2 more elements that I want you to try to kind of pay attention to on your own. We have water, which is a significant deal. And then we have wind, which is plays a significant role, but much smaller, right? That's not used as often. So pay attention to water and wind and see if you can kind of figure out what the significance is of those 2 elements in the film, all right? So there's a little bit on cinematography. So next, we're moving on to acting performance. The acting, there's nothing too much to kind of get into here. It's traditional performances for the time in Japan, okay? Again, this is a period drama. So some of the performances are heavily influenced by what we call no theater. So what is no theater? It's a Japanese dramatic art. It's a mix of music, dance, and acting. It's known for its slow, stylized movement. Actors embody a role through gestures and posture. So another thing that's kind of part of this whole thing is you get these kind of very slow stylized movement, and then sometimes you get some very erratic motion on top of it. So there's like this really stark contrast between their slow movements, very calculated, and then something going a little bit chaotic or not violent in a bad way, but just kind of aggressive or whatever, right? So where I want you to kind of watch for that is focus on the bandit early in the film and then the wife later in the film. The bandit kind of has this kind of diabolical, kind of mad laugh that he does, right? That's just kind of suggests that he's a little bit off, mentally ill or whatever, right? And you're going to see his story, and sometimes you're going to see him have this kind of maniacal laugh. And then there's a point when somebody, I can't remember who it is right now off the top of my head, but when you're hearing the story again, the wife is kind of trying to manipulate the situation, and she kind of takes on that persona where she has kind of the maniacal laugh and madness kind of thing. So see if you can kind of notice that, pay attention to that, and kind of use that as you're listening to whose story being told as to why they would kind of translate it that way. All right. So check that out as well when you're looking at acting performance. Editing. So Kurosawa plays a role in the editing of his film, a significant role. Like he really wants to see things a certain way. And so he's really got his hands into the editing process of his films. It's a nonlinear story, which we talked about. We're seeing kind of flashbacks and different POVs of the same event. So this plays out. It's in the writing of the film, but then we see it played out in the editing of the film. Okay. So that's going to be an important thing. It's in the writing, in the narrative, as well as the way the film gets edited as well. Okay. There are 407 separate shots in this film, which is about twice as many than the average number of shots in movies. So there are very extensive shot composition, shot organization in this film, and Kurosawa is very kind of meticulous about how he puts this stuff together. So again, part of the reason why there's so many shots is because we are seeing the same event being told 4 different ways, and in each way it's a different version, so the perspective is different. So we might see the same, we're going to see the same events happening 4 different times, but from different camera positions and different angles and different positions. So think about that, and that's another reason why it took so many times, or it took so many shots to get the film done. Okay. And then the other thing we talked about in earlier on is he's well known for this thing called an axial cut. And an axial cut is just a jump cut that gets us closer or further away from our subject, right? We either start close and then bam, cut farther away, or kind of far away, and then we cut in real close on somebody. And it kind of takes the place of kind of a slow push in or a slow pull away. Those slow moves are very kind of, again, there's a lot of, introspection or kind of depth to those slow moving shots. And when you do something that's kind of jump cutty and jump here and jump there, that's kind of jarring, and it's got kind of a story function when we cut in like that, right? So as you see those, I think you see a couple of those in this film, but it's something he's known for. In the deep dive, you'll see a little YouTube short that kind of explains an axial cut. I think they use, I can't think of which film they use, but they'll show you a couple examples of what an axial cut is. So go check that out so you understand that a little bit better. He's also somebody who popularized the transition called a wipe. So that's just the screen changing as it wipes across this way or wipes across this way, or blooms out to another image. Another film that's really well known and like established for those kinds of transitions. It's not something that gets used very often today, but Star Wars franchise uses these kinds of wipes. So George Lucas used them originally in the 1970s versions. And then it's something that franchise continued to use. And it was something that Akira Kurosawa popularized, and they do some straight wipes, I believe, in Rashomon. And here, check this one out. I'll show you this one. Okay, so that's just a straight wipe. Okay, so those are the editing points I wanted to make about this particular film, and we're going to move on next to sound design. Okay, so in sound design, the score is by this very well respected composer. I'm never going to be able to pronounce his name correctly, but he's very well known, very respected at the time, and he did the score for this film. It's a very traditional score throughout. Kind of the film gets dramatic when it needs to. It gets kind of mysterious when it needs to. It's very well done. There is one little kind of twist or caveat to the whole thing. Kurosawa wanted the wife's story to be, the music to be a little bit different for her story. So he had the composer compose this bolero, which is a Spanish dance that runs at 3/4 time. So I kind of noticed it when I watched it, and I kind of discovered this after the fact, that the music for her story was a little bit different. It doesn't catch you off guard, but you definitely take notice of it, and it makes you kind of perceive her story just a little bit different. So see if you can catch this bolero that sounds a little bit different, because again, a bolero is a Spanish dance, where the rest of the film, it's very Japanese influence when it comes to the sounds and the instruments and the music and the way you're hearing. The other thing that you don't see as much as you would see in a modern film is you don't see a lot of sound design. So there isn't a ton of hearing the feet on the leaves on the ground and hearing as he passes by branches or any of that kind of stuff. They do use sound effects when you hear the wind and the rain and water and things like that, but we don't get as much sound design as you would in kind of a modern film. So it's a little bit quieter in that regard, and a lot of times it's a score that's kind of carrying us through sections. So kind of pay attention for that as you go. All right, so our cinematic terms for this particular module, we have auteur director, so make sure you understand what that is. So if you see it on the quiz, the Rashomon effect, there's a great video on the deep dive page, definitely watch it. It explains what the Rashomon effect is, and they use it in this film. Nonlinear storytelling, okay? The idea that we are telling a story, not A to B, we're A to B to C to D, we're going D to B to C to A, we're bouncing all over the place, right? We are not seeing a straight line storytelling approach. Limited space. So we talked about limited space regarding the frame. So that is when we have the frame of the movie, and then they're using things inside the frame to kind of squeeze our actors into a smaller space. Okay, so look for those. We have the axial cut, which is kind of a jump cut. And again, there's going to be a link to a YouTube short that you can watch that just shows you some examples. And then we have the wipe transition, which Kurosawa is known for. And I showed you one of those in this presentation. And again, if you want to see a bunch of wipes, just go look up YouTube and say transitions in Star Wars, and you'll see them do all kinds of different wipes in the Star Wars. All right. So anyway, this one's a little bit longer, but this is a very important film. We're starting to get a little bit more modern, and Kurosawa was a heavy influence to everybody as he makes his way forward. So he's somebody you need to know a little bit about. So anyway, hopefully you enjoyed this and you enjoyed the film. We'll talk soon.